For 77 years, the real story about Admiral Richard E. Byrd's trips to Antarctica was locked away, embedded in military records and kept alive in the mind of one man. That has all been silenced at last. With his passing, the last living witness has broken his silence, sharing secrets so incredible that they may force us to rewrite all we believe we know about our world. Why, for example, was Operation Highjump armed like a full-on military invasion? What became of the phantom missing team that never surfaced in official records? And what did Admiral Byrd himself report seeing under the seemingly endless expanses of Antarctic ice? These are the questions that Robert Johnson, after nearly 8 decades of silence, finally provided answers to, and they explain why governments all over the world struggle to keep the truth under wraps. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Spark Science, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. Admiral Richard E. Byrd Jr. was much more than another adventurer in the annals of history. He was the very essence of adventure, leading a life so enthralling that it could have been taken from the pages of an epic novel. Born in 1888 to a distinguished family in Virginia, Byrd was destined for greatness from the start. His introduction to the U.S. Navy began a career of bold accomplishments, fueled by an endless pursuit of leading, breaking records, and being first where no man had ever gone before. His fellow officers admired his ability, his superiors trusted him enormously, and the American public worshipped him. With his piercing blue eyes and innate charm, Byrd became not only a naval officer, but a living legend of American enterprise and bravery. His legend was sealed early by acts of unprecedented audacity. In 1926, he said he was the first man to have flown over the North Pole, a feat that won him international recognition and the Congressional Medal of Honor. He didn't rest on those laurels. Shortly thereafter, Byrd set records with flights over the Atlantic and then the South Pole, standing as the first human to cross the most inhospitable parts of the Earth by air. His feats enthralled the country. New York City hailed him with not one but 3 ticker tape parades, a distinction so unusual that it put him in the ranks of only the most iconic names in American history. But Byrd's desire to explore was not fired by a hunger for glory alone. Every journey pushed human endurance to its limits, stretching body and machine into new and unexplored dimensions. To Byrd, Antarctica was no desolate landscape of ice and snow, but an unopened manuscript waiting to be written, a canvas waiting for the bold brushstrokes of discovery. It was that vision that compelled him to return to the icy continent time and again, this time with greater, braver, and more clandestine missions. His first 1928 expedition was a gigantic success. Having set up the first American base on the Ross Ice Shelf, Byrd and his crew carried out vast airborne surveys, unveiling the wide expanse and unexplored possibilities of Antarctica. When he returned in 1933, Byrd upped the stakes. This time, he deliberately spent 5 terrifying months in a solitary weather station in the wilderness. There, by himself in temperatures dropping well below zero, he almost perished in carbon monoxide poisoning. Far from discouraging him, the experience hardened his determination and further forged his legend. But under the tough exterior, Byrd knew that certain discoveries were too significant, or possibly too risky, to reveal to the world. Whispers were in the wind in naval intelligence circles by the late 1930s. Rumor had it that Byrd's flights to Antarctica had revealed anomalies unexplainable, bizarre magnetic fluctuations, cartographic singularities, and unexplained formations within the recognized template of geology. They never surfaced in newspaper accounts, but they caught the ear of the U.S. government, which started keeping close tabs on Byrd's missions. It was in 1939, while Byrd was making plans for another expedition to Antarctica, that he encountered 19-year-old San Diego Sea Scout Robert Johnson. Johnson thought he was applying to a typical scientific expedition, but when he showed up for an interview with Byrd at a naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, he soon learned differently. Instead of inquiring about navigating or mechanics, Byrd demanded of him directly, could he be trusted with a secret? Was he completely loyal to the United States? In that dimly lit chamber, Johnson felt the gravitas of something much bigger than a mere expedition. Byrd wasn't searching for braggart adventurers, he wanted unobtrusive, dependable men who would take orders without question and never speak of what they saw. Johnson's demeanor of calm confidence stood him apart from the rest, and without question, Byrd selected him. Johnson had not yet made the realization that his journey had crossed with that of one of the greatest mysteries of contemporary times. He was soon to behold things he could not talk about for almost 80 years. Initially, he was just a young man privileged to serve with a national hero. Very soon, he would learn that Antarctica contained secrets much greater than glory or discovery, secrets that would never be documented in history texts. To everyone in the 1940s, Antarctica was still just a blank spot at the bottom of the world, a huge slab of ice, home only to penguins, seals, and screaming winds. But to the world powers already preparing for the Cold War, the continent stood for something much bigger, an icy game board where the pieces in play were not merely over territory, but over the world. Underneath the infinite ice caps, geologists surmised giant deposits of coal, petroleum, and uranium, minerals strong enough to fuel a nation for centuries. Whoever owned Antarctica would own not just untapped riches, but perhaps the future as well. By the time Robert Johnson joined Byrd on his initial Antarctic deployment, the struggle for dominance of the continent was already underway. As large as the United States and Mexico together, Antarctica had no governing authority, no borders, and no binding claims. All it would take to shift the balance of power was a base of operations, a flag in the snow, and a couple of months' occupancy. To the outside world, Antarctic missions were presented as heroic endeavors, brave scientists and sailors weathering the chill for the sake of unadulterated knowledge. Newspapers published smiling men standing next to penguins, or pilots proudly standing in front of ski-equipped planes. But beneath the propaganda was the real motive. Countries were surveying airstrips, exploring supply lines, and mapping areas with rich resources. Johnson would later remember the eerie occurrences that daunted even veteran adventurers. Compasses spun wildly, refusing to orient themselves towards the north. Radio signals disappeared into static before re-emerging as if nothing was amiss. In parts, the ice radiated with a faint glow from within, casting an unearthly sheen. The auroras, unusual, glowing forms of the southern lights, would sometimes writhe into unnatural forms, staying far longer than science could account for. Veterans spoke in whispers that the lights were watching them. Officers dissuaded such conversation, but it never completely disappeared. Byrd himself was shy in public, rarely commenting on such anomalies. Yet Johnson observed that the Admiral would readily call for diversions whenever anomalies were seen. Flight patterns were changed, ground crews swapped out, and specialist teams sent, all without comment. Official logs frequently didn't square with recollections of men who had witnessed. Antarctica itself was part of the feeling of unease. Mountains of dark rock rose like broken teeth from the level ice, some strangely snowless in spite of the cold. Johnson heard rumors that these were not natural at all, but the result of something forcing its way up from underneath. On one supply mission, Johnson witnessed something that haunted him for the next 40 years, a colossal crack in the ice, so deep that its bottom was not visible. Warm air spewed up from within, bringing with it a white mist that curled into the cold sky. On the chasm's rim, Johnson sensed a slight vibration, something akin to the muffled roar of machinery. His education had not prepared him for that instant. Unknown to the men, each anomaly was deliberately recorded, categorized, and shipped back to Washington. For those in residence there, the events were profoundly disturbing. For military planners, they were mysteries, and perhaps possibilities. Antarctica was no longer a frozen desert. It was a stage for invisible competition, science entwined with secrecy. Admiral Byrd and his crew were pawns on this icy board of chess, manipulated by unknown hands in a game of international power. And the bizarre lights and malfunctioning compasses were just the tip of the iceberg. Next would come the United States, with overwhelming might. Antarctic expedition in history. Officially, it was called Operation Highjump, which was explained to the general public as a plane training exercise. Its official rationale stated that it was to test the resilience of men and machines in extreme cold, chart previously uncharted coastlines, and practice resupply operations in enemy environments. That was the version reported in the press and parroted by Navy press officers. But to those who did participate, the sheer scale of the mission implied something much greater, something that defied explanation as mundane scientific activity. The statistics alone were breathtaking. Operation Highjump sent 14 vessels, a full aircraft carrier and well-armed destroyers, 33 planes, outfitted for reconnaissance and combat, and an astonishing 4,700 personnel. Tanks, tracked vehicles, guns, and sufficient firepower for an invasion were hoisted aboard. No country sends so much brawn to the bottom of the world just to count penguins and take snowdrift measurements. To the men on board, the expedition was less mission and more war campaign set for battle. Robert Johnson, in his 20s now, again served under Admiral Byrd. As soon as he came aboard ship, he sensed the difference in the atmosphere. The discipline was crisper, the tone stricter, and there was an almost tangible undercurrent of tension pervading the crew. Men obeyed commands with clockwork precision, and the sense of preparedness was different from previous expeditions. It seemed as if everyone knew, although no one ever said so out loud, that they were moving toward contact with something or someone unexplained. There were rumors circulating before they even arrived on the ice. Since World War II, there had been whispers of Nazi presence in Antarctica. There were some intelligence reports that suggested German U-boats had penetrated south during the last months of 1945, supposedly bringing men, equipment, and technology to a secret base somewhere in the polar wasteland. They described geothermal oases, bizarre areas of open water and heat locked in the ice, that in theory might be able to hide entire complexes. Johnson could not confirm if these accounts were accurate, but he was certain of this: the Navy was gearing up for the scenarios it was not disclosing in public. When the fleet finally made it to Antarctic waters, the operations bifurcated into two sets of activities.